to Inner Fortitude with Isis. I'm your host, Isis Byrne, and I want to thank you for joining me on your next step in your journey to self-love. Today's topic is forgiving yourself. Before I start, I just want to say that if you appreciate the content that I'm putting out and you want to continue to receive tips from me, please do not forget to subscribe to my podcast or my channel. It will help go a long ways in giving me the ability to continue to produce more content, things that are even more helpful for you in the future. So hit the subscribe button. Okay, so today's topic is forgiving yourself. Before I dive into how you can begin doing that, I kind of want to discuss what the definition of forgiveness is. I think that the majority of people believe that to say, I forgive you, is a way of telling someone that it's okay that you treated me that way in the past, that you did these things to me. In a certain way, we see it as telling somebody that I forgive them means that I'm giving them permission somehow to have done what they did to me. And in addition to that, in addition to the belief that saying I forgive you is basically a permission ticket, we also hold on to that forgiveness because we think that if we hold back and we hold a grudge and we hold on to that pain and that grief and that anger, that somehow we're punishing them for having done what they did to us. But what if that definition is completely wrong? What if we need to redefine what forgiveness actually is in order for us to be able to do it, not only for forgiving other people, but obviously, ultimately forgiving ourselves for the mistakes that we've made. Oprah Winfrey, back in 1990, she had a guest on her show, and they were discussing forgiveness. And he said something that was so profound that I think it can actually change, hopefully, your perspective, because it definitely changed. It changed Oprah's. And when I heard the definition, it completely clicked. So his definition was that forgiveness is giving up the hope that the past could be any different. So notice that it doesn't actually mention the offender. It doesn't even mention you. It just mentions the fact that the act of forgiveness is letting go of a hope that the past could be any different. So for those of us who looked at, other people's wrongdoings or even our own, we thought, this is unforgivable. I can't move past it. We hold on to those grudges for the rest of our lives in some cases. And every time that we think about the harm that this person has done to us, we revisit the pain over and over again. And if it's something that we've done to ourselves, we kind of beat ourselves up. So we're not only the victim of the circumstance, but we are also the offender. We're the person who made us bad. And so we take that approach of punishing the offender, and in some cases that is ourselves, over and over again for having inflicted that pain upon us or upon others. But if we take this definition and we say, forgiveness isn't about a ticket, it isn't a gift to somebody to say that it's okay, it isn't giving them the ability to heal, it's our own belief that holding on to that baggage, that really heavy bag that we've been carrying on our backs throughout the days, months, years, it is so heavy. It is holding us back from actually just running free. If we could take the bag and just drop it on the ground and keep walking, imagine how liberating that would be. Imagine how much more you can deal with in your life, how many more relationships would improve, not just the internal relationship with yourself, which is the sole most important relationship you'll ever have in your life, but also the relationship that you try to build with others. It'll build your self-confidence. It boosts your ability to be compassionate, self-compassionate. And once you know self-compassionate, you're better at being compassionate with other people. So why can't we let go of something that happened that we can't change? The past happened. Looking at the past and the pain that it caused, whatever it was, it already happened. We can't change it. So unless you have a time machine, you've invented one or you found one, unless you have a time machine, there is nothing you can do about the past. The past just is. And so if we use this definition, that it is giving up the hope that the past can be anything different, then we are leaving it be. We are accepting not that something, that it's okay for something that happened to us to have happened, but that it's just something that happened. It is giving ourselves permission to move on. This takes us from a position where we are the victim of our circumstances and into a position where we are a survivor. And surviving in and of itself brings its own power. There is nothing more empowering than to look back and say, I've been there, I've done that, and I rose above it. I have moved past it. I have learned my lessons. I have taken, the opportunity to learn from that past experience, and I'm not letting it hold me back anymore. It doesn't serve me to hold on to those things anymore. So that's what today is all about. Today is all about taking something a mistake that we have made, maybe multiple mistakes, a mistake that we might have made. Maybe we hurt ourselves. Maybe we hurt others. But today is about starting to forgive ourselves for our past mistakes, because there isn't a single person in the planet that has not committed a mistake. Not a single person. Some of them are big and some of them are small. But we're human, and humans do make mistakes. We are imperfectly perfect. So I'm going to get started on a process that I put together to help guide you on the path to self-forgiveness. These are steps that I took in my own life. I struggled for years, beating myself up over mistakes that I made when I was young. And it took me a very long time and a lot of help from people, from resources. I mean, I didn't realize that holding on to my past mistakes was actually holding me back so badly from happiness and building deep and meaningful relationships with other people. I ended up getting to the point, and maybe this sounds familiar to you, I got to the point to where my mistake made me feel as if I had to protect other people from me. Like I didn't trust myself to make the right decisions in the future or to make the right decisions now. And so it was a little bit self-destructive, or a lot of it self-destructive. But with the right tools and with the right process, I think you can get out of this too. I think that you can come out on the other side the way that I did, where now if I do make a mistake, it isn't that I instantly think, well, it's not that big a deal. I go through a process until I can understand it, and then I can let it go. So let's get started on this amazing program that I have compiled that I think will be very beneficial to you. And speaking of benefits, what are the benefits of forgiving yourself? before I start on my process, do you know that forgiving yourself actually improves your emotional and mental well-being? That you're holding yourself back when you don't forgive yourself, that it helps you to produce more positive attitudes. It helps you to build more meaningful relationships with other people. It teaches you compassion for others because you have learned to be compassionate to yourself. So when you know that you yourself are an imperfect human being, it's much easier to accept that other people also are imperfect human beings. And while we don't turn into doormats, because that's not what this is about either, we don't turn into doormats, we do start to understand where the forgiveness begins and ends. And if we need to set some boundaries or end toxic relationships, we can do that too. But there is an analysis that's involved there. You don't just immediately make a decision to say, once I forgive somebody, all is forgotten, because that's not what it's about either. You do not forget what happened. What you do is you accept that it is in your past. You accept any opportunities for learning from it, and you can move forward by leaving the bag behind you. So let's get started. Step number 1, I'm looking down at my notes because these are multi-steps. So the first step of the process is to process your emotions. I know that, especially if you've been struggling a lot with the feelings that are involved with this, and you make it a habit to dismiss what you're feeling, the first step is not to dismiss them. The first step is to actually acknowledge what you're feeling and allow yourself to give yourself permission to feel it, and give the feelings a name. Name your emotions. So if the experience has made you angry, if the experience has made you sad, if the experience has left you lonely, depending on what you're feeling, put a name to it. And there's a method to my madness. There's actually, I'm gonna look this up because this is so awesome. So there is a fun, crazy fact about why it's so important to name your emotions. There was actually a study done by a UCLA professor that found that naming our emotions actually makes those negative or unpleasant emotions like anger, sadness, pain, less intense. The research showed that when we have our feelings, there's a part of our brain called the amygdala. There's an increased activity in the amygdala. The amygdala is responsible for detecting fear and producing like a series of alarms, bells, and whistles to our bodies that we are in danger and that we need to protect ourselves. And so if the amygdala's responsibility is to increase our alert, alert, danger, danger, they're finding that once we label that feeling, we give a name to it and say, I feel afraid. Just saying, I feel afraid, and giving it a name, like identifying what it is that's the problem, actually decreases the activity in the amygdala and increases the activity in the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex. Yes, I know those are big words and it's science, but that is the part of the brain that's responsible for inhibiting behavior and processing emotions. And so they're saying we reduce the amygdala, fear, danger, danger, and it increases the part of our brain that allows us to kind of take a step back and observe, inhibiting behavior and processing our emotions. Lets you feel the fear with less intensity. And so what they basically discovered is that when we label our emotions, the area of the brain that allows us to kind of take a step back is actually strengthened. So you can actually exercise your brain and train it to lessen the pain. And so we're better able to respond to feelings that are unpleasant, like fear and sadness and anger, less reactively and more responsively. So I thought that was really neat. And that's the reason why it's important to give that emotion a name. So give yourself permission to feel it. It's okay to feel angry. It is okay to feel afraid. It is okay to feel a million different unpleasant things. Emotions are not bad, so don't be afraid of them. But you've got to let them sometimes go through the process. If you've got to cry it out a little bit, cry it out. The feeling will pass through you. Emotions are not supposed to last forever. So, name it. And you can't say it out loud. Why not? Okay, so on step 2. Step 2 is to analyze the mistake. So the key to this in analyzing your mistake is to make sure that you are also analyzing it with compassion. And this is big for a lot of people because a lot of us don't really know how to be self-compassionate. We're so used to just beating ourselves up and saying, you're dumb, you're stupid. Why did you do that? You should have known better. You were in the perfect relationship. How could you wreck it? You were in the, you already knew better. Somebody already told you not to do it and you did it anyway. And look what happened. And so you start to, kind of let your inner critic take over. When in reality, you need to kind of bring out that little angel on your shoulder to say, hey, listen, let's look at this with a little bit more rational outlook, with a more rational outlook. Look back at the time that you made the mistake. Okay? Look back and ask yourself, what was I going through at that time? How old was I? What was I experiencing when I made that mistake? What was it that I was thinking when I made that decision? What did you know and what didn't you know? And this is extremely important in separating your former self with your current self. Because the thing is about beating ourselves up, we do it so easily because we're applying our current wisdom, our current experience of the consequences, our current, knowing what it cost us. Knowing that was really dumb and I would never do that again only comes from a place of wisdom and knowing that I already made that decision. I know what it felt like to make the decision. I know now how it feels to deal with the consequences. And that's why we keep trying to go, I'm applying my current wisdom to my former self, and my former self is held to a standard that's impossible. Your former self did not know what you know today, period. I don't care if it happened last week. I don't care if it happened yesterday, if it happened 10 years ago. You've got to look back at who you were, what you were going through, what were you experiencing at that time. Look at this with compassion. If you have to pretend that person, that your former self, is your child going through it, or your best friend that went through it, someone who you care very, very dearly for, if they came to you and said, I made this mistake, and you know what their consequences are, how would you see that same situation? Would you say, oh yeah, you were pretty dumb? That's the inner critic. But if it's someone that you care about and they came to you and said, I made a mistake and I regret it so much, I should have known better, what will you tell them? That's the compassion. We tend to have compassion for other people much more easily than we have for ourselves. But once you've mastered self-compassion, so analyze the situation, look at it, ask yourself questions. Where was I at that time? Was this the first time I ever experienced marriage? Was this the first time that I went out with my friends? Was this, somebody that I really liked? Was this maybe somebody I took for granted? Start thinking about the reasons that were going on in your head during that time. Who were you then? What were you going through? And try to understand why or how that decision could have come to be. With compassion. So dismiss the inner critic that's telling you that you're stupid and you shouldn't have done it, that you're an evil person, because you're not, and open your eyes to, let me understand. Let me understand what they could have been going through at that time. Okay, so the third step is to accept that all mistakes are a learning experience. So as you may have gathered from the advice that I just gave on analyzing it with compassion, you're asking yourself questions like, who were you at the time? What were you going through? What were the consequences? And what would I do differently? Always with compassion. What would I do differently? That in and of itself is an experience in learning. It is an opportunity to grow. No one is born knowing everything. Everyone, absolutely everyone makes mistakes. And so everyone from our parents, our mentors, our idols, everyone that you have ever looked up to has made mistakes. So you are not a crazy person. You are not an alien. This is just a learning experience that has passed, by the way. The experience is behind you. You may still be feeling the consequences, which might make it difficult for you to understand and leave it in the past, but it's still something that already happened. It's done. And it's an opportunity for growth. So accept that it's an opportunity for growth. Step 4, put the process on hold if you have to. If you find that you're going through this process and you're having a really hard time, coping with the emotions, you're kind of hitting a, replay button in your head and you keep reliving and you're not feeling like you're making progress, give yourself permission to put it on hold. There's actually a tip that I read about that you are to visualize. So if you're feeling overwhelmed and you can't continue doing this for right now because it's overwhelming, visualize the mistake. Put it in a jar or like any kind of container, a box, a mason jar, whatever, and basically put it aside and tell yourself that you're leaving it there for now. You'll come back to it later. It's not following you around. You're not carrying it around with you. You put it in a little jar and you've put it down and you've said, I will deal with you at another time. I need a break. Go for a walk. Pick up the phone and call somebody that loves you, that you care about. Try to find something else to do for a little while. Come back to it another day if you have to. But sometimes it isn't just the first time around. You're not going to be able to heal overnight in some cases. Sometimes it takes a little time. But if you keep at it, you will get better. You will start to understand a little bit more. And you will start to build a little bit more compassion. Which leads me to the step number 5, which is to talk to your inner critic. So when I picture an inner critic, I'm imagining this like scary, crazy, red hot, nasty person that lives in my head that always wants to point out my every mistake, my every flaw, my every fear. The one that just kind of, knocks on my head and is just like, remember me? I know that my inner critic, I kind of see my inner critic as irrational. Angry, irrational, rude, obnoxious, all those things. But your inner critic can teach you things too. So instead of just trying to push out the inner critic, because a lot of us, again, we try to dismiss emotions, dismiss the feelings that come along with it. If your inner critic is trying to knock on your door to say, hello, I want to remind you, then answer the door. Talk to your inner critic and write down. This is the perfect opportunity to journal. Write down exactly what your inner critic is saying, one by one, okay? He's saying that I should have known better. He's saying that I was old enough to make a better decision, that I have no excuses, that this is not the first time I made a mistake. So what is it that the inner critic is telling you? All of the things that they kind of yell at you about, well, yeah, you're not worthy, you're not XYZ, okay? Write it down, every single one of them, as ugly as they might be. And then I want you to respond on paper. So you have now your list of things that your inner critic has decided to vomit onto you. You are going to respond with compassion to each and every one of them. You should have known better. With compassion, your response can be something like, I was only 15 years old. I didn't actually know better. You were already told that this was wrong and you did it anyway. I didn't realize the severity of the consequences if I decided to do that. At the moment, joy took priority over logic. I didn't know what I didn't know. So you respond with compassion. You answer the inner critic with, these are not fibs, these are facts. Compassion is just a gentler way to see the world, a gentler way to observe your decisions, to non-judgmentally look at the situation and try to comprehend something that would seem impossible to the outside world. But you've taken the time to go, actually, that's not what I felt at the time. I felt alone. I didn't know where else to turn to. I didn't know what I didn't know. And be compassionate about it without judgment. You're trying to figure out what happened. Once you figure out what happened and why it happened to the best of your ability, you can then take that and say, what are the lessons learned? What were the consequences? I don't want to feel that again. And then you can say, all right, now that I know what the consequences are, this is what I learned. I now know. And it's like magic. You become a better person. Which leads me to the next one. So the next step, step 6, make amends with yourself. You know, the example that I gave a little bit earlier, think about what it would be like if your child or your best friend came to you with this mistake. What would you say to them? What advice would you give them? Maybe it's to make amends with someone else, if that's possible. You don't need to. Not everybody is going to be willing to hear you out. And you have to accept that you don't actually need to make amends with other people at the end of the day. If they're not willing and they're not open, that's on their schedule. We can't control that. You cannot control someone else's ability to understand you. The only thing that you can do right now is say, I know that I've done harm, maybe just to yourself, maybe to other people. If you try to make amends and you own it, and you take and say, okay, I'm holding myself accountable. I admit something wasn't right. Even if the person never says, I forgive you, you can make peace knowing that you took something positive from it. You can move past it because you understand it, you learned a lesson, and you're better for it. You're a better person today than you were then. And the last one, and it isn't necessarily a step in a process that I can help with, but it needs to be said. If the issue that you are trying to work on in forgiving yourself is so big and you've tried these steps and you've tried other things and you are caught in a loop of replay, right? A replay loop, just repeat in your head, and you're reliving these emotions on a regular basis and nothing you're doing is helping, no matter how hard you try. I am urging you to seek professional help. There's absolutely no shame in asking for help in self-forgiveness. So no matter what, okay, whether you go through these steps yourself, and I hope that it genuinely helped me. And I did do this healing on my own. A therapist gave me guidance, handed me steps, handed me, books to read, and I took it and ran with it. And this is what I ended up with. I ended up with coming out on the other side, feeling better than ever, not just for that one thing I didn't forgive myself for, but for all the others, right? That I didn't trust myself in anything anymore. To now I know, and I'm in complete control of my life. I have complete control over my decisions, and I'm not afraid to make them anymore. I realize that I'm not a product of my circumstances. I removed myself from the victim position and moved myself into a control. I moved into the driver's seat because I will not let the past hold me back. Even if it was self-inflicted, you can still leave it behind you. You do not need to carry it with you. You should not have to carry that weight anymore. You are worthy of happiness and success. So believe that. It is true. It isn't just something people say. For me, along with that forgiveness that I finally got to, came a surprising gift in self-love. I found a new appreciation for healing a deep wound that I finally sealed. And after that, I celebrated the scar that it left. And I respected myself enough to ensure that I won't commit the same mistakes again in the future. So revisit your younger self, even if it is just a day ago. Think back and ask yourself what led you to make that choice. Understand who you were then, what you knew, what you didn't know. Acknowledge that, it isn't your present. Leave it in the past. Focus on the here and now. Bring yourself into the present, because this is what matters. What you do from this moment forward is what matters. Your power is in what you do now and in the future. So start now. Thank you for joining me today. As you probably noticed, self-forgiveness is something that I myself struggled with for many years, and I hope that this episode has kick-started your own healing. Please don't forget to subscribe so I can keep offering life tips and bits of wisdom. You are brave. You are enough. You are worthy. Be kind to yourself. And I'll see you tomorrow.